Romy, Emily, Daron, and as of just hours ago, Leary, Karina, Daniela, and Naama, 7 young women that were held captive in Gaza, they are finally home. These past few weeks, Jews across the world, we cannot peel ourselves away from the news, all of us anxiously awaiting their return, still awaiting the return of the remaining hostages. And we wondered if Hamas would continue their savagery, their psychological, emotional, and physical warfare, and renege on the agreement. But this morning, we celebrate their return, and I don't want to focus on Hamas this morning. This morning, I want to focus on all of you. For back on Israel's soil and out of harm's way, Emily and Daron and Romy are quoted as saying, "We saw your fight. We heard our families battling for us." And Romy continued, "The prayers and strength that all of you sent accompanied us the entire way and helped us believe that this nightmare will ultimately end." These women experienced hell on earth, living underground at times, struggling to breathe, rarely seeing the light of day, little food and water. And I'm sure the other details of their horrors will come out, and we'll hear more about their gut-wrenching experiences. But today I'm holding on to one piece of their story, a glimmer, if you will, because somehow, through bits of radio and television, these women knew that their families, immediate and extended, never stopped fighting. And I believe that the small efforts that we make here, I think, have ripples across the world. Because who knows, maybe their families received a little encouragement to keep saying their children's names. Maybe they had the motivation to keep speaking out, the strength to keep going on, because all of you, and I'm speaking to you, to Sinai Temple, and I'm speaking to you, to the Jewish world, and I'm speaking to you, to all of our allies, you refuse to forget. You refuse to give up. You refuse to tire. Perhaps our worldwide energy contributed just a little bit to the soulful fuel, the fuel that these families need, and maybe, just maybe, it was the knowledge of their families' persistent fight that helped those girls to hang on just a little bit longer. The lesson impacts us in more ways than one. We cannot underestimate the power of one person's actions when another person is enduring a plague. This morning in our Torah portion in Va'era, we see the introduction, the beginning of the plagues that are unleashed in Egypt. Next week we learn about the plague of darkness, but I'm choosing to speak about it this morning. Because in Shemot it reads, "Moses raised his hand towards heaven, and there was a great darkness over the land of Egypt. People did not see their brothers, and no person could rise from where he was seated." The Even HaEzel, a 19th century Lithuanian rabbi, explains, the greatest darkness that a person can experience is when they can't see the fellow human being standing right next to them, and when they choose not to participate or witness the distress of others. Now, I think the commentary offers an important detail. It wasn't that there was this sudden darkness that erupted from the heavens. What the commentary explains is that a spiritual darkness was already present in Egypt. Egyptians could not feel or see another person's despair. Even if the misery was right before them, they weren't able to see past themselves. And so the physical plague of darkness, it enhanced what was already there. And so the takeaway is that when we see someone else's distress or pain or fear or loss, unlike the Egyptians mentioned in the Torah, we must not remain complacent. We can't stay seated, solely focused on ourselves. We must not succumb to spiritual darkness. But it's quite the opposite that we learn in our tradition. La Yehudim Haita Ora, as Jews, we experience light when we give light. We remember that it's possible to have a hand in relieving someone else's suffering, even if it's just a little bit, when they're close by or even thousands of miles away. A few examples of how we help others endure a plague. Notice I didn't say cure or end, but endure. We may not be the ones that are physically pulling someone out of Gaza. We may not be the ones who can quell the fires in Pasadena or the Palisades. We may not be the ones to cure a disease. Now, some of you in this congregation certainly have the expertise to do some of the things that I mentioned. But for the majority of us, it's just not our skill set. But the rabbis in the Talmud understood that the human mind often focuses on what we can't do instead of focusing on what we can. And so they offer the following motivation. Masechet Nadarim teaches that when a person visits someone who is ill, the ill person is relieved of 1/60th of their illness. It doesn't sound like a lot, but to be relieved of even a small increment of illness feels like a monumental task. It teaches us that even just your presence helps a person in pain endure the unbearable in a way that otherwise would have been harder without you. This week, Rabbi Taft shared with me a beautiful story. He said that he brought hundreds of handmade notes and cards to the firefighters from the children of Sinai Temple. And he thought to himself, okay, I'm going to drop off the cards, and sometimes when we make cards, it often makes us feel better. He had no idea what he was about to experience, because he passes the cards to a very large, grown, wonderful fireman. And the fireman burst into tears. Now, Rabbi Taft was shocked because, as I said, they're just cards. But to that firefighter in that moment, this man who felt depleted emotionally and physically, spiritually, a man who hadn't been home in days, working all hours, day and night to save someone else's home, to know that even one kid believed in him, that someone else's child believed that he could continue to hold the line and still continue to face these deadly, devastating fires. Well, in that moment, it was a child's confidence, someone he probably will never meet, that served as his fuel and contributed to his being able to endure this awful plague of fire just a little bit longer. It feels simple, but it's anything but. Putting the picture of a hostage on a chair at your Seder. Maybe it's still wearing the yellow ribbon or the dog tags around your neck. Maybe it's posting their names on social media or putting a banner up during the high holy days and keeping it up day after day. Maybe keeping their names alive here helps fuel the families there, which maybe, just maybe, gives a glimmer of light and hope to those that remain plunged in darkness, held captive in the torturous tunnels of Gaza. Now, we usually don't receive feedback as to whether or not our actions make a difference, How do we know if that card or text message matters? How do we know if the meal or the shiva call, if it was well received? The short answer, we don't always receive an immediate response. Sometimes we don't receive a response at all. But even with the knowledge that there might be the slightest possibility that we might help someone else endure the plague that they are experiencing, we must make the effort. The effort to show up, to write the card, to wear the ribbon, to bring the meal, to open up our sanctuary, to make the call. We show up because it is our lifelong Jewish mission to reveal God's light, to upend a spiritual darkness throughout the length of our days. United Hatzalah recently shared a story online about a medic that picked up 2 very injured soldiers. And the medic put one soldier in the front of the ambulance and the other soldier in the back. Now, they were both in need of major medical attention. But where they were placed, they really weren't able to kind of speak with each other or see the other person's pain, but they knew how badly each one needed medical assistance. So the medic went to one and started to assess the first soldier's needs, and the soldier started to protest. Don't touch me. Don't treat me until you go back to the back of the ambulance and treat the other soldier. Well, the medic is like, okay, Israelis, I can't do that. Decided I'm just going to listen, went to the back of the ambulance, and what happens? That soldier says, I know that the soldier in front is in need of your attention. Don't touch me. Go help the soldier in the front. And the medic is so frustrated. He goes back to the front and he just decides, I can't listen to these two. And he eventually puts an IV in both of them and saves both of their lives. But it was clear how connected these soldiers were, front to the back of the ambulance, unable to see each other, but it doesn't matter because these two are emblematic of the Jewish people. When another is enduring a plague, as Jews, we find ways to ensure that one does not endure a plague alone. One of the released hostages reminded us, there is life after death. We have the ability to be God's emissaries, offering sparks of life to those that feel as if it is prematurely taken away. We must help others endure whatever plague they are experiencing today and whatever plague they might experience tomorrow. And it just might be you. Your voice, your actions, your deeds, your prayers. It might just be you that lifts a sliver of the darkness and allows another person to feel God's goodness, God's grace, and God's light yet again. Shabbat Shalom.